Any and all topics seem to be fair game at the Synod, but one topic considered by many Catholics to be the greatest issue of our time is getting zero airtime at all. Join us now from the Eternal City, Church Militant's own correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, while the Synod is discussing the Church's outreach to all the peripheries and how all the sheep should get equal attention, a recent event in Rome focuses on a major blind spot at the Synod. Tell us about that.
Brad, very high-profile Catholic figures. These include politicians, scholars, activists, have organized an alternative synod in Rome last week. The first bit of that synod was held online, but then they moved to Rome. And part of the reason for organizing this alternative synod right in front of the Vatican is because these Catholics feel that some very serious concerns are not being listened to by the people who are supposed to listen, and that is the synodal fathers and mothers. Now, speakers and organizers of this synod include the former president of Ireland, Dr. Mary McAleese, and the very distinguished sex abuse expert, Father Thomas Doyle, a canonist who has handled, over 1,000 sex abuse cases and investigated them thoroughly.
So now, at the Synod itself, a famous advocate for abuse victims, as you talk about, Doyle, called out clericalism as a major catalyst for clerical sex abuse and its cover-up. Can you talk about who he is and what's he saying?
Father Thomas Doyle, as I said, is hugely distinguished. He was a former Dominican, and he spent most of his life investigating this phenomenon. Why is it so, endemic and entrenched in the Catholic priesthood? Now, Doyle has written a number of books on this topic, but he seemed to be breaking new ground in this talk. And let me give you one quote. He, of course, pointed to real clericalism as the problem that is causing much of this sexual abuse. He said this, the source of the plague of the sex abuse of minors, and we're talking about prepubescent boys here, is, I quote, the traditional devaluation of children. He talked about how the theology, or rather a false theology of the priesthood and a mythical image of the priest, as promoted, according to him, by Pope John Paul II, is responsible for that. He gave a very interesting example of a hearing where a bishop who was confronted with, a cover-up and child abuse by many of his priests, he simply shrugged his shoulders and said, "Little boys heal." And this is the kind of attitude. That sentence, says Doyle, that concept manifests the fundamental ignorance of the hierarchy about the damage done and the effects of sexual violation on the young. None of them have ever had children. If you have ever had children, you cannot, if you have never had children, Doyle says, you cannot properly appreciate the damage that is done by sexual abuse.
Well, he has a huge point, Jules, with clericalism. I mean, you put the collar on that gives you access to all of the people. You have any abuse, and no one's going to believe it. They put you on a pedestal. You can't, it's almost like you're impeccable when you are ordained in the eyes of many people. So the cover-up, at all costs, cover up the abuse because you don't want to tarnish the reputation of the priesthood. So this clericalism is at front and center. So, this whole synod, Jules, on synodality began to spool up around late 2019, right on the heels of 2018's infamous Summer of Shame, spotlighting the massive sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, a problem which is still being outed today. Is Doyle's concerns of clericalism and the concerns of this alternate synod that the Church address these issues, is that being addressed at all or even discussed at all at any of the synod proceedings for the whole month or prior to?
That's a very relevant question, Brad, because we know, as you just said, that there were protests. Some of the, again, very high-profile advocates protesting, advocates of victims came and protested right outside the Vatican. Then we had the massive Rupnik, Father Marco Ivan Rupnik scandal explode again because Pope Francis invited his collaborator, Dr. Maria Campatelli, and had a chat with her and released pictures of the two together, which was considered a real slap in the face of the victims. And ironically, Campatelli, we now know, is a co-author of one of the synodal documents. And then we had Cardinal Angelo De Donatis, Pope Francis's vicar, the person who runs the Diocese of Rome on his behalf. He gave a clean chit, seemingly, to Father Marco Ivan Rupnik, who has been accused of sexually abusing over 25 nuns. So, but the Synod is so distracted by issues of, migrants and same-sex blessings and the ordination of women. They don't seem to be really talking about this very critical issue that has cost the American church, for example, $4 billion.
Yeah, just the number of it all, and then the number of people who have left, the suicides that have come out of it, the lack of reputation, the tarnished reputation of the church with all this. And you would think about if the Synod on Synodality is anything about moving forward, about how we're going to present the Catholic Church to all the peripheries, the greatest wound has been self-inflicted with regard to the clerical sex abuse crisis. And that is in our own time. That is right on the, preceding the Synod. You would think that somehow, some way, that these victims should be listened to, their voices should be heard, those sheep should have been, how are we going to shepherd them, and how are we going to correct the problems in the priesthood? None of that is being addressed at all from what I understand. So, but moving on, Jules, your prediction that the Synod would be discussing the ordination of females to the diaconate, that was kind of poo-pawed by some. Is that prediction bearing any fruit?
Well, certainly, Sister Mary Barron, who is the president of the International Union of Superiors General, she said that the question of women deacons is on the table, and that in the Synod we have both ends of the spectrum in terms of what we believe. So she was not able to give a definitive answer, but she said the final document of the Synod may have more clarity on this topic.
Yeah, it's so funny. You got these people that are going to be voting on, what the direction of the church, and of course Pope Francis is going to be it's going to hopefully just be a advisory thing for him. But you have, like you said, people on both ends of the spectrum of what to believe. Why would you consult people on both ends of the spectrum? There's only truth stands in the middle. There only can be one truth there. So another prediction of yours, Jules, about discussing a form of governance in the church that would bear a striking resemblance to that of the Anglican Church, a church which you yourself used to be part of prior to your conversion to Catholicism. How is that prediction coming along?
Brad, I have repeated this prediction ad nauseum, and it seems that the prediction is coming true, because what is now being talked about is a federation of churches. So, for example, the Archbishop of Tokyo, Tashiko Kikuchi, who is president of Caritas, he said that the Synod shows that Catholicity does not mean uniformity, and one size does not fit all. He says synodality has to be applied to local cultures and contexts, and that is why we can have the discussion, for example, of homosexual couples alongside polygamous families. The Western world, at least for now, is not very favorable to polygamous families. but is accepting of homosexuality. The Africans are, vehemently opposed to homosexuality, but they're open to polygamy. So if the cultures are different, let's, settle for national doctrine, as it were, and national churches that can adapt to their own context. This is what happened to the Anglican Communion, and this seems to be the very direction in which the Roman Catholic Church, which has had its center in Rome for centuries, is now beginning to evolve into.
That's amazing. There's still just one human nature, a fallen human nature that we all share. And God created us all in his image and likeness. So you'd think there would be pretty much, and there's only one set of 10 commandments, and that's kind of a uniform thing for everybody. So I'm not sure exactly why it's such a tremendous emphasis on all this diversity all of a sudden. But that be as it may, the Synod, by all accounts, is supposed to be more about best practices rather than church teaching. And conversations continue about ordaining women or even married men. But in light of the fact that more than 80% of clerical sex abuse was perpetrated by homosexual clerics, why is there simply no discussion at the nearly month-long synod about not ordaining men with deep-seated homosexual tendencies? Jules, thank you so much for keeping us up to date with the news and your inside analysis.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks again for watching today's episode of Rome Dispatch. This show is brought to you by donors like Real Estate for Life. If you're looking to buy or sell a home and want to support our mission, visit realestateforlife.org. Again, that's realestateforlife.org. Be sure to tell them Church Militant sent you. God bless.